The final whistle has just gone in Sydney and, spoiler alert, press away now if you don't want to know the result. The Wallabies have come back to win the third test, albeit losing the series 2-1, but they thoroughly deserved their win tonight on a wet and windy night in Sydney. Hello amateurs, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be here with you throughout the Lions series. It's done, it's all done, but there's loads more coming on the Amateur Rugby podcast, so hit subscribe to follow along. Now then, the story of the pre-game was all about the weather. Absolutely monsoon-like conditions at times running up to kickoff. It was so heavy, windy, rainy, threats of thunderstorms. Spoiler alert, watch out for that coming in the second half. But it did look actually relatively dry at kickoff. I'd say relatively. The pitch would have still been soaking, obviously. But the teams really, they did come out, and once they got field position, they were very happy to play with the ball. And for the most part, actually, the handling was really good, I thought. That deteriorated a little bit as the game went on. But for large portions of the early part of the game, the handling was great. And there was a decent amount of rugby played when you consider the conditions. Early doors, Blair Kinghorn made a bit of a break, which led to a Will Skelton penalty for holding on at the ruck. And just shortly after that, this was a sign of things to come. He got penalised, and then Gibson Park tried to get the ball, and Skelton just batted him away like a tiny child. Gibson Park fell backwards onto one of his own players' knees, and it made me laugh, to be honest. It was quite comical, but there would be plenty more push and shove and physicality and attempted intimidation all the way through the rest of this first half. It was a big part of this game. It was a big part of how the Australians got themselves fired up, got stuck into the Lions and really disrupted everything that was going on. I think it was key in their victory this evening. It was a brilliant grubber kick from Tom Wright, which gave the Wallabies a 5-metre scrum, but Porter absolutely annihilated Taniela Tupou on this one, but the scrum was only reset. I think it was a reasonable call by the referee, by the way. I'm not criticising him on that at all, but the Wallabies managed to pick and go. They got, by the way, again, their pick and go game and their forward carry game, they're so consistent with this. They didn't make huge yards today, but what they did was they managed to maintain possession and therefore pressure on the Lions for long periods. And as the game was wearing on and the Wallabies had the advantage on the scoreboard, that was really telling because it just took time out of the game. They were really good at it. However, they picked and go, pick and went, and the Lions were defending well. There was plenty of good tackling from the Lions, but they got the penalty advantage, I think, for an offside. Ball spun left to Suaalii, and this is quite remarkable, actually. It was a carbon copy of the winning try from last week. On this occasion, Suaalii did the little jump to the outside like Keelan did last week, only this time Freeman stepped in, which left Peach a diving finish in the corner with Russell coming across. It's really hard to know whether that is actually a mistake from Freeman. If he'd left Suaalii against Gibson Park, there's every chance Suaalii would have scored anyway, like Keenan did last week. So it's a tough call that to be in that position. The covering defence also very nearly got to Peach as well. So yeah, it's a 50-50 call, that one, I think, in defensive terms for Tommy Freeman. But a great start for the Wallabies, and they were 5-0 up. But the Lions were actually doing, at times their kicking game was really great, but at times the accuracy was just off, and the Wallabies probably edged that battle as well. Their kicking accuracy, I think, was just a little bit better. But the Lions did get a couple of good ones in a row, with Gibson Park getting up. The aerial battle was won by Blair Kinghorn, and then Russell kicked one to the corner to give a 5-metre line out. And it was at this point where the weather conditions changed to some degree. The amount of rain that came down, I mean, maybe I have before, but I can't off the top of my head think of an occasion when I've seen more rain coming down at a televised rugby game. You got Piardi, the assistant referee on the far side, covering his eyes so that the rain's not getting in it, so he can see what's going on. It was absolutely sodden. But again, actually, the handling was still, for the most part, really good. Both teams were still looking to play little short passes and get the offloads going. And the Lions were battering away a little bit. And I would say when the Lions carried, they did look like they had a little bit more edge, that they were making more ground and finding slightly more gaps, but they could not maintain that. They could not do it for long enough, not even close. The Wallabies dominated territory and possession. That meant that the Lions' opportunities to attack were far fewer, and we'll get onto why that was a little bit later. But the Wallabies were also putting into good defensive sets. Su'Alii put in a massive hit on one touchline. I think it was against Freeman. And then it was the same person that got it on the way back when Peach whacked Freeman again. It has to be said, Dylan Peach on the left wing. I spoke about it in the pre-game. I'd said about when he played against the Lions earlier in the season, in the tour, and he just looked like he wanted to bring the fight. And he definitely did that today. I thought he had a great game on the left wing for the Wallabies. There's a bit of kick tennis after that, though. Neither team wanting to play within their own territory, understandably. And of course, we were going to see that when when the conditions were like they were today. There was a brilliant turnover on Bundy Aki by Tom Hooper, who held him up. And I've got to say, Hooper back into the side, actually, along with all the people that came in. I've already mentioned Peach. Hooper had some big involvements as well. And Taniela Tupu, after that dodgy first scrum, went on to have a great day at the scrum and in the loose as well. I thought he had a really good game. Australia, talking about that, exactly. Straight after that, Australia won a scrum penalty. Now, these are very close, and I was monitoring Twitter all throughout the game, and of course the anti-Porter brigade were out with talking about his angle, but it's give and take with these things. Taniela Tupu was certainly angling across slightly, okay? And if he goes across and then keeps going, Porter can only go with him. That's the only thing that can happen. So to scrummage legally is very difficult in that respect. I think the referee got this one right. I think Taniela was slightly in at an angle, but not illegally, and it meant that Porter swung round, and therefore, once the Australians got the drive on, it was more about them winning the scrum as opposed to illegal scrummaging, I would say. I think the Lions stood up in the end. So, but that was a big moment, I would say, especially when you're talking about these conditions. To have your scrum going really well is so, so important. Shortly afterwards, Ty Bird won a turnover penalty at the ruck. Excuse me. When all hell kicked off. And this was due to Jamison Gibson Park trying to get the ball back quickly. It was down to Dan Sheehan trying to get the ball back quickly off Nick White. Nick White, who in his final international was an proverbial pain in that. He was absolutely into everything. Starting fights everywhere, starting scuffles. He took one onto Owen Farrell later on. He was doing exactly what his team needed of him. Absolutely. And his kicking game was excellent. And he drove his forwards around the park, making sure that they got the ball in front of them. I thought Nick White had a really excellent game for his final international. However, that penalty was given to the Lions, and it stayed with the Lions because Skelton came in and he was the one that really aggravated the situation. He was the one that really changed the sort of mood there. So he was given an extra 10 metres by the referee, who was trying desperately to keep a hold of what was turning into a very niggly game. And you know what? With games like this, I would much prefer to see a load of niggling there than a load of kick tennis. At least, you see you see the passion in players when you see all that going on. And these teams were going at it in that respect. Australians, definitely the aggressors, but the Lions absolutely fighting back with all they had as well. Big moments though. Finn Russell just dropped a ball on the halfway line shortly afterwards. And he was probably going to kick deep into Australian territory from there, I think. And it's these tiny little moments. And actually, I say tiny, there were quite a lot of these types of moments, again, primarily because of the weather conditions. But it's momentum. And, when I said the Lions couldn't build any pressure, it's things like this that just relieves pressure from the Australians and heaps it on yourself. And you've just got to minimise those things when the conditions are like they were. The Australians, though, played some wonderful attack following this entry for them. Some of the handling, some of the offloads, they looked a little bit like the Harlem Globetrotters. They were batting the ball around, and they were all going to hand. Everything was working fluidly for the Australian attack, and they continued to batter away. When they weren't playing, they were battering away, and they kept at it. I have to say, the Lions' tackling was absolutely incredible. They were whacking the Australians back. Skelton made far fewer metres in traffic this week than he did the last, but his hands at the line were also fantastic. So he put Tupou into little seams a couple of times for big yards. And they just maintained momentum, though. They just maintained pressure. They kept on it, even if they weren't making metres. And ultimately winning penalties. This was a big call, actually. 27 minutes gone. They had a very kickable penalty right in front of the post, and they went for the corner. It was at this point another big moment, because I'm sure he would have gone on to be as Norge's best throughout the rest of this game. Maritoji off with a HIA. Lions defended them all, but it was a big scrum which led to an Aki knock-on and a scrum to Australia right in front of the post. More amazing Lions defence. The Australians again battering away, managing to maintain possession. Skelton and Porter were having a fight on the far side of the ruck, well behind play, like 10 metres behind play, and thank God they were, actually, because the Australians put Jorgensen away down the right, and Porter, because of that fight, just happened to be in exactly the right position to make the tackle, which was quite remarkable. But the Wallabies again got another penalty for offside, and rightly so. Liner kicking this one for 8-0, but then immediately going off for a HIA afterwards, and I'll talk about that at half time because it only became apparent once the Australian TV directors had found the footage for why that was. And yeah, I've got to say the Lions are pretty fortunate in this situation. So I talked about the scrum, the Lions line out, and I wanted to shout commentator's curse as soon as Sam Warburton talked about it. The Lions had only lost one line out this series. They lost a lot today. And I say lost, fair play to the Australians. They got up and they dominated the aerial spaces. They seemed to be able to read where the Lions were going to go, how many movements they were going to make. And Nick Frost, I don't know how many lineouts he won against the throw, but it was a lot. And even if he didn't win them, he caused it to be a bit of a mess. The ball delivery was poor. The Lions had basically zero platform from lineouts today. And I think if I had to pick one thing from this game, I would say it was that was a real turning point, because they could not get any game going at all. So Lions again were attacking well and going forward when they had the opportunities, but they were very few and far between. Tom Hooper getting another good turnover at the ruck, and Owen Farrell was on for Tommy Freeman, who got whacked. It looked like he'd broken his nose, got whacked in the face. He was officially off for a HIA and wouldn't return either. So Lions getting a little bit depleted. So I've mentioned all the things. At half time, I was thinking scrum, I was thinking line out, I was thinking kick accuracy. Because actually, during the contact phases, during the battles, during the carry and tackle situations, I think the Lions were doing okay. Australia were maintaining possession, but the Lions weren't going backwards, really. Now, this is where I'll talk about Dan Sheehan, because just before half time, they showed several replays, and then they showed them right at the start of the second half as well, clearly trying to illustrate the point that Dan Sheehan had flown into a ruck. And without a doubt, I've got to say, he's tucked the arm. I don't think he's trying to hit him with the elbow, but that is what made the first contact to Tom Liner's head when he had to go off for a HIA. I think if this one was reviewed, minimum a yellow, probably a red, by all accounts. So Dan Sheehan lucky to continue on the pitch. The TMO obviously missed that one in real time and couldn't go back for it after that. A poor kick from Finn Russell to start off the second half. You just want to get pressure on the opposition, and it allowed Tom Wright an easy catch in his 22 for a mark. He then took that really quickly and then whacked it up the field. And I saw this in real time. The ball didn't leave his hands. The referee has said, look, it was a free kick. He's kicked the ball. And look, let's be honest. We see this all the time with penalties to touch. Kickers always take a little bit of an advantage from this. So I think the Lions were right to complain and try and bring it to the referee's attention. But I like to see a little bit of leniency in this. I would say it's right on the edge of the amount of leniency I'd like to see. And I think he got away with one because he did shape to tap the ball himself and didn't do it. However, I'm not going to be complaining about that at all. And I'm sure the Lions won't be afterwards. But they were right to pick it up during the game. Big moment shortly afterwards as Will Skelton carried out. James Ryan, head on the wrong side of the tackle, caught one of Skelton's knee and was out cold immediately, basically. Horrible to see, but when you tackle like James Ryan does, unfortunately, it's always going to be a little bit of a possibility. He would have liked to have got his head on the correct side, and then the head contact would have been a lot less. But when you tackle that low, you can't see the target you're going into in those final few seconds, so you don't get the opportunity to sort of adjust your position. Fortunately, James Ryan would be okay. He got stretchered off, all that kind of stuff, but we saw him up and at the end of the game. So hopefully he will make a swift recovery from that one. Another scuffle started straight after this. Skelton, I believe, was actually trying to look after James Ryan on the floor. Porter thought he wasn't, so was just pulling him back. Nothing much in that until Nick White came in and whacked Owen Farrell. And then again, it all kicked off from there. Possibly a little bit harsh because I think White's action was the most aggressive one, but Porter was the one that got penalised, and it's hard to disagree. He did drag Skelton away. That was what made White move. I don't know. It's a 50-50, and I think maybe the referee was like, right, you've had one, any more, and it's a yellow card, which again is a decent way of dealing with it, I think. Then I wondered whether we'd see thunder on the field on Saturday, and we ended up seeing lightning. Well, at least the lightning warning as the players were asked to leave. I've never seen that in a televised game that I've personally watched. I hear it happened with England-USA just last week, but I've not personally seen it. So it's a very strange situation. You saw Genge and Angus Bell, the two opposite number 17s, having a lovely little chat on the way in. Countless pitch invaders going on, apparently, trying to do a length of the pitch, which earned them, by reports, a $5,000 fine each. They probably won't be too happy about that when they find that out. Into the changing rooms, you see Finn Russell on the phone, probably updating his Instagram. The Lions players lying around on beanbags. They look cool. I'd love to have one of those. Somebody threw a towel over the camera. And then you see Alan Walters actually doing what he's renowned for. Like every little interaction he had, he seemed to bring a smile to the players' faces. And of course, you can't maintain that intensity, that level, all the way through a dip in there. You need to let it release and then build it back up again. And Alan Walters was doing brilliantly at that for the Lions. As soon as they came back on, and this is what I was talking about, Skelton, he had people on him. He got knocked back a few times in the tackle. But his first carry, he tipped to Tupou, who almost went clean through. Apart from the tiniest tap tackle I think I've ever seen by Owen Farrell. He must have just clipped his ankle enough to make him trip over himself. Tupou knocked on, but that could have been very worrying, particularly for Hugo Keenan, who was next in line to tackle him. I no doubt he would have gone in and whacked him as hard as he could, but I feel for the little Irishman in that regard. Genge was also on, and he won a scrum penalty immediately. And you know what? It was a really good angle to see this scrum from, and I could see that he was desperately trying to stay like high and wide and straight. As Tupou did angle in a little bit. And it was just a slight changing of the tide there. I think Genge was really conscious of it. I'm sure the scrum coach would have been on it at half time. So that was a penalty up to halfway line. The Lions win the line out, but it was really scrappy. Again, ball quality was poor, but the Wallabies gave away another penalty for tackling Gibson Park without the ball. 2 penalties in a row. This is what the Lions needed. They needed some entry, but then the Wallabies got up and nicked the next line out. The line out was so key, so key in this game. And in that respect, I think Nick Frost deserves a huge amount of plaudits and respect. I think his input has gone a long way to the Wallabies winning this game. There was an incredible kick from Finn Russell. He was sort of caught behind the line a little bit, just looking for something. He managed to kick it through to the right touchline for Hugh Jones to pick up and charge onwards. Jones now playing on the wing, obviously, after Freeman going off, and it was the right decision to try and chip over. I really think it was the right decision, but it just sliced off his boot in the wet conditions, and that was another chance, another entry opportunity gone for the Wallabies. Harry Wilson was absolutely having a captain's knock. He is one of the bravest men on a rugby field, and as he carried the ball up from a dropout behind the Lions line, he got absolutely belted by 3 Lions, including Ty Byrne, who got the best of it. That led to a slightly negative rock. Tom Curry making the tackle and Jack Morgan getting over for the turnover. Morgan, who did a lot of good work both on attack and defence today. But so this went to another line out then. Penalty kick for a line out, and I've just put line out, question mark in my notes because it was such a key area and the Lions weren't getting it. But they got this one, only for Bundy Aki to be absolutely manhandled by Len Ikitau in the midfield on the first carry, which led to a turnover. And yeah, fair play. The Wallabies put in some massive defensive efforts today. That some of the turnovers they won were really, really high quality. And I think this one was right up there as he managed to scoop Bundy up a little bit and hold him up. Now we're talking about scoreboard pressure. Now we're talking about clock pressure, because the clock was kicking down, and 8-0 in these conditions is still, it's still a decent lead. It's very difficult to score points. The Lions pressured. They really put themselves under pressure by trying to play a passing move around about the halfway line. Owen Farrell had 3 men on the outside, was playing the ball to Kinghorn the right pass. I'm not so sure. I think Aki further out was definitely looking for it. I think Sheehan was on the outside as well. I think either of those 2 guys would have made a better passing option However, he gave it to Kinghorn. Kinghorn then was man and ball, essentially. He tried to flip it onto Aki. He was actually ahead of him. So that pass was never on. Once Kinghorn had got given that pass, he really should have just held it and taken the L, basically. Aki reached backwards to try and catch it, couldn't do so, and Jorgensen picked it up and with his outstanding pace scorched away for 15-0. And that was a massive moment at 55 minutes. Yeah, the Wallabies, again, just applying pressure at the right time. The Lions trying to play through the pressure. And in those conditions, it's just very difficult to do so. Wallabies doing a great job with that. And Jorgensen getting another scampering away, breakaway try like he did in the first test. However, Harry Wilson, I've just given him some plaudits, but he dropped the kickoff. And a rare opportunity for the Lions to have territory and possession. However, Nick White, in what was about to be about his last involvement, did a brilliant job of running in the passing lane of the out-the-back pass, just got in the way there. The TMO went back to check this for some reason. I've got no idea why. There was absolutely nothing in that whatsoever. White was just trying to bat the ball back to his side. It's a couple of interventions from the TMO today, which, in my opinion, I don't think the TMO should be getting involved with. That was one of them, and we'll get to another one later on. Tom Wright knocked the ball on from a fairly innocuous kick. But again, this in a game where there's so few opportunities, that ball flew directly to Bundy Aki, who also knocked it on. It's hard to say whether it was a real try-scoring opportunity, but it was definitely an opportunity to get territory and possession. And it was gone. Another opportunity gone. Nick White off with a massive smile underneath his massive tash. At that point, I'm sure he thought, that's enough. We've done enough here to win this game. And he turned out to be absolutely correct. Tupu off as well shortly afterwards. He'd had a shift. But the Lions were driving again. Again, like I said, when the Lions actually got territory in possession, they looked okay. They looked pretty decent. They were finding seams. They were making yards through the forwards. And that led to Jack Morgan getting driven over for a test match try of his own by Ollie Chesham after Keenan was trusted with carrying the ball up on a short ball. I mean, he's very strong for his weight, but man, he did so well to get as close as he did. 7:15. Was this a chance for the Lions? Still 18 minutes of the game to go. 2 scores needed. Absolutely is a chance in this game. Of course there is, but they couldn't get a clean exit. Russell was trying to find some space. He eventually passed it to Keenan, and the ball had gone back into the 22. Keenan kicked out on the full, and that was a massive momentum shift. The Wallabies went back to what they've been doing all day long. They kept the ball. They drove hard. They didn't have to make big meters. They didn't have to really dent the Lions as long as they could maintain possession. And they did. Until Morgan got penalised for a high tackle on McDermott. Again, kicked to the corner. Multiple penalties. Yellow card warning. Peach very nearly got over on the left-hand side, but knocked the ball on almost in the act of scoring thanks to a great piece of defensive work from Jamison Gibson Park. But in that movement, Kelleher was offside again. That was a yellow card. Minutes later, McDermott was sneaking under a tackle for 22-7. And that was officially the game. There was no coming back from that. I mean, even in really good conditions, and even if the Lions had some pressure and territory and looked like they could play and score earlier in the game, in this game, it looked very dead to me at that point. 73 minutes, Jack Morgan was adjudicated in real time to knock the ball on the left-hand touchline, but you could hear Emma Kelly sort of say, was that a knock-on? Not sure. TMO comes in and confirms it wasn't a knock-on. Obviously, the Wallabies players had heard Emma Kelly say knock-on advantage, so that would affect what they're doing. I just think you let the team of 3 on the pitch deal with this kind of stuff. Just let them do it. And I don't want the TMO get involved in stuff like this. I don't need the game to be perfect. Just let the boys play, essentially. So that ended up being a Lions line out. Great stuff. Another one for the Wallabies to nick. They were so good at that today. I tell you, it was a massive part of the game. Suoliti forced a massive knock-on turnover on Ty Burn. I've got to say, Suoliti's physicality today was at a different level. He looked like he was at a level when he whacked Tua Piloto in that Scotland-Australia game last year. He was fierce today. Question mark whether this one was high, but the Lions got a penalty anyway for an off-the-ball tackle on Earl, who made a couple of big breaks through the middle after he'd come on. But again, the Lions just could not make the most of it, really. Not consistently enough anyway throughout this game. They got the penalty to the corner. Sheehan did something which I rarely see him do, you know. He was back on, obviously, with Kelleher getting the yellow card, and the Lions were driving towards the line in a maul, and he broke off early and got caught short. That, I can't remember. It may have happened before, but I don't recall it. He's normally so efficient in those areas. Genge literally tried to dive over the defensive line. There's been a lot of chat about diving to score the try this week, and I've maintained throughout that I don't think this will be a thing. I think if you dive to score a try over the line so often, without any traction, you get driven back, and that is exactly what happened to Ellis Genge here. It's not an effective method to score tries when there's no element of surprise. Genge got thrown back onto the Lions side of the ruck, but they got another penalty. Tapton went, and eventually Will Stewart, in some boots full of studs, as opposed to the ones that he lost last week. Yellow ones. These must be his spares, I'm guessing. He couldn't get the last week's ones repaired in time. Over for the try with seconds remaining, literally seconds remaining. Finn Russell grabbed the ball very quickly, desperately trying to attempt a conversion so they could have another play at least and make the score look a bit more respectable. Big kudos to Finn Russell for being that much of a competitor. Like, he knows the game's lost, but they still want to go out and try and get another try. I loved that about what he did there. But ultimately, huge respect to these Wallabies. They came in with a plan to get involved, get stuck into the Lions, and ultimately, I think their set-piece work, and I think their ability to take the chances when they got them, was what separated these teams. The Australians were absolutely thoroughly deserved winners, and I am pleased for Australian rugby because that is good for world rugby. I think after a damp first test, we've seen two really good test matches here. This is not a classic by any means. Wasn't it? You know, the conditions would never allow that, but niggly, aggressive, really confrontational, yet with the utmost respect at the end. Watching the guys clap each other off, shake hands, you could see there's a lot of warmth between these guys that compete so hard on the field and then just shake it off afterwards and congratulate each other. That's always good to see. Okay, this is the second last video from me in this Lions series. I'm going to be back later with Elko to do a proper match review, and we'll talk into a load more other things as well. What do you think, though? Let me know in the comments down below. Where do you think this game was won and lost? We'll have a friendly conversation there in the comments. Always respectful in the comments, guys. Respect the players, respect the referee. I've had to deal with a lot of comments this last week with people just not following those simple guidelines. I will delete comments. I will get rid of them. I don't want to have to deal with it, but I will. So anyway, ending with a smile, we'll give the video a thumbs up while you're down there if you've enjoyed it as well. It helps other great rugby fans like you find it, and you can subscribe there. You can watch that one next. And don't forget to get out and play.